This afternoon we have
Tom?
Basem Abu Dagga, who's going to be working or talking with us about how do we ensure operational efficiency across markets and providing space for a lot of health systems, hospitals, providers, big or small. So a lot of times for the smaller guys, it's harder to operate. It becomes a little bit more difficult for them to survive in especially competitive markets.
Yeah.
When they don't have that competition, when we don't have that, we have less innovation and potentially less choice. So thank you, Basem, and take us away.
Thank you for the intro. Welcome, everybody. Today, tomorrow actually is a lot faster than we imagine. It's more like tomorrow, now. And that's how fast things are going. I worked on one of these in the 70s and 80s. It's a telex machine for those that have not witnessed this era. It was a very lovely innovation that soon after the fax machine was invented. Not sure when you all sent your first email, but that was for me in 1990. My first email was sent to a friend at UCLA. 3 hours later, he comes back and says, "Oh, thank you for sending me your note." It was, of course, extremely formal back in those days. And I received your email. And that was when we were working on Unix. Nowadays, as technology evolves and as the world evolves so quickly, we get into all sorts of different bits and pieces. But then you start hearing all these words: cryptocurrencies, blockchains, AI, clouds, computing, smart systems, IoT, and the list goes on. I attended a conference 3 months ago. And the first speaker came on board to say that 60% of the jobs in the next 3 years are going to be obsolete. So no new jobs are being created from the same sort of mindset as the old school. The other guy came up and said, everything's in the cloud. If you're not in the cloud, you're basically nowhere to be found. You need to be out there. And that's how things work. Blockchain was a very integral part. A whole full presentation took place, mind-blowing. And at the end of the day, you think that technology is so fast that it's coming at you in every other concept. This guy was telling me, why don't you use blockchain in real estate transactions? I'm like, all right. Sell your car through blockchain. I'm like, oh, okay. Let me see how I'm going to do that. And then, of course, all the other exciting features. What topped it up for me in that conference was that with an audience of 200 people, a 14-year-old gentleman came up on stage and was addressing us better than anyone that I've seen, telling us about the 4 books that he's written, the 3 apps that he's developed, the 2 companies that he's developed and sold, the being on the board of IBM and doing all sorts of very exciting stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, holy, what? This is beyond tomorrow for me. I'm a little bit of an old school. Keep in mind this lovely telex machine that I've used before. All right, so a little bit about today and what the realities are for the UAE healthcare sector. So the economy here is a very large supply and very competition at the lower level. I mean, meaning at the polyclinic level, where there's a lot of polyclinics operating comfortably. Where the economy was supporting them with the amount of business that they were getting. A very large geographical spread. There's a lot of pressure from insurance companies on these clinics and polyclinics, and I'm actually effectively targeting the smaller players here, the people that are below the radar, in a sense that where the big guys are not even interested, they're looking at these guys. You know, the big boys are getting bigger and stronger. You hear about consolidation efforts on a daily basis. Last week or last month, there's been another major acquisition going on in the healthcare space. All the big boys are basically fighting for all the rest of the airspace that we might have or might not have very soon. The regulators are taking a firmer line as well, so there's a lot more focus from the regulators. They're actively trying to increase the quality or improve the quality of healthcare at every level. And the valuations, and that's the area that I'd like to focus on as well, has also been declining for these businesses as they get extremely competitive. The bottom line of these institutions or these facilities are not going as good as they are. They're actually decreasing in profits. So this all brings us to a higher demand for debt, where they want to go out and acquire some assisting financing, and there's not much out there. So some of the things that we, and if you reflect on the larger guys, I hope they're not listening here. But so these guys are building scale. They're building their hub and spoke systems, referral systems, centers, left, right, and center, specialized services. They're able to deal with a large scope and a large economy and a much larger operation. They are in very large geographic areas, and they're very comfortable working with insurance providers. And that's where it begins. The insurance providers have taken a fantastic stance now in the operations of the larger setups. Now, they are also able to maintain the inflationary increases. So as a lot of the inflation that's been kicking in, they accept it, they're comfortably operating with it. Under the circumstances of their size and their growth, they're able to push out more value for their customers as opposed to these smaller operators. Now, one of the more interesting parts of these large operators' efficiencies is that they're able to acquire and procure services at a much lower rate than these smaller polyclinics. And now with this, we move on to the other area, the strategy of the insurance and TPAs. So what these guys are doing, they're applying a lot more of their pressure. They have to, because they're bleeding. They're not as comfortably operating. So these guys are applying a lot more pressure onto these polyclinics. They're also holding on to historic prices, which are maintained at a much higher level. These historic prices are not very conducive for the smaller players. They're not even able to. They're not negotiating they're as easily as you'd like to with the smaller players, the polyclinics and the smaller facilities, and they're moving to a greater capitation of contracts. So that allows even further pressure on these smaller players. They also have intentions to move into further downstream operations like specified diagnostic centers and other services, because they've got the bandwidth to do that. So that leaves the independent providers a few options of either becoming highly specialized, or in the very competitive nature become very cheap and try to capture more volume, so which takes this whole industry and this whole polyclinic level to a race that takes these profitabilities and performances to a lower bottom that has not been seen before. It also gives them another option for an independent provider to sell out to the larger players if they're interested, larger operators, because they would like to capture the value now of what they have, and at the same time be able to ride the wave of being part of a larger, stronger organization. Now, these same polyclinics or these independent providers are working with, they have interest to work with third-party claims management companies or revenue cycle managements to reduce their leakage and improve their insurance claim performance and reduce the rates of rejections. Or, I guess, last but not least, they have an option to consolidate with others. And that's a very, the C word's a very tricky word to be used out here, because you do want to consolidate for the benefit of these smaller players or these independent providers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about consolidation and what that means, as if you're consolidating your facilities with another independent provider, you're actually gaining a lot more strength. You're building your competitive edge, and you're able to compete with the bigger boys, and that's what can be a bit of a savior for some of these smaller polyclinics. So for smaller polyclinics, they're also finding another challenge. And if any of you own clinics here or aspire to own clinics, maybe one day. So for those that they own these clinics, they realize that it's a lot more complicated for them to survive. It's a lot more challenging. They have an option to either sell or merge or be acquired or find a way out to expand their platform. Becoming a part of a bigger network is also very enticing for them. They are able to do a lot more, which I'll touch on shared services later on. With increased regulation and standardized encoding and requirements and poorer purchasing terms, the lack of scale is adding to the complications of these smaller players. So by consolidating, the larger groups are actually taking over the smaller or they're competitive players, and making it really complicated for the smaller operators to be in existence. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the trends and valuations. So current trends in the healthcare sector have actually created a much more a lot of pressure on the valuations. So meaning that if you've become part of a bigger organization, you can ask for more money for your clinic, for your polyclinic, for your business. But if you're on your own, there's not a lot of interest in running your own operations. Larger players will not come in and merge with smaller players because it's not small, it's not big enough. They don't have enough scale. They don't have enough bandwidth to acquire the smaller players. And so with that, it leaves the smaller polyclinics hungry for larger revenue streams, hopes that they can scale up their business faster, and more importantly, achieve a better bottom line, which allows them to consider. So the higher or better bottom line, EBITDA, is the multiple that has been used for clinics to figure out their valuation. I'll touch on EBITDA for those that are not financially inclined. So that's the multiple of the profits, and it's the earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And this is a number that is effectively the net profit that is multiplied by an industry comparable value that allows them to come up with a valuation of the business. And historically, the smaller clinics, and I'll touch on that very soon, had been achieving a 7 to 10 times multiple in the past. But as the competitive landscape is taking place, with the pressure that we're seeing, these polyclinics are going after, they're coming up to 5 times the multiple now, so which means that the owners of these clinics are actually losing a lot of value. By being able to consolidate their efforts and become part of a larger organization, their valuation multiples become better. This is a snapshot of what the healthcare providers in the UAE have been selling for, and just in a simple example here, I'm not sure if it's too close from here. So 20 doctor clinics, for example, at Dira was sold at 6 times the multiple in the toward the end of 2009. And as this progresses, it goes anywhere from 6 times to 7 to 8 to 9. In the good days of 2014, you were getting a 10 times multiple for your value for a polyclinic. And then as it progressed now, today it's no longer where it used to be. So you can see the trend in a competitive environment, and in what we're witnessing in today's world. The valuation is not what it used to be many years ago. Now, how do we benefit from, how can we improve our valuations and improve our service and efficiency? By consolidating and by going onto a shared service platforms. Many of these clinics are able to share the most critical resources that they would have. In the essence that they're looking at strategic leadership, it gets centralized. The leadership is no longer working at the polyclinic level, which historically would not have the bandwidth to hire a leader, hire a marketing executive, top of the notch marketing executive, an HR. And by consolidating and having a centralized platform, these smaller clinics or polyclinics get together. They take out and extract all these back office operations, which are not client-facing, whether it's on the IT level, the legal framework, the HR, the accounting and financial reporting. Those are currently, all these services are currently burdening these polyclinics, and if the owner of the polyclinic is struggling between meeting with patients and running his HR, assignments and hiring someone and firing somebody, doing the marketing and financial planning and reporting, and you can see that it becomes extremely challenging for a one man or a small operator to be able to exist in these days. So by consolidating their efforts with a platform of other polyclinics, it gives them the strength and the bandwidth to be able to focus further on their patients, deliver high quality care, and at the same time be able to employ the top of the line resources that allow them to achieve a more competitive, better successful operation and efficiency. And with that, I think we leave it to imagination to enable us to consolidate the smaller clinics without interfering with the ownership. So what we want to do effectively, or what needs to be done effectively in this environment for these smaller clinics, is that by getting together, sharing their resources, they become a lot more effective. And that's something that would be interesting to see moving forwards. I think with that, I would like to thank you for listening, and I'll be happy to take up any questions that you might have. This might be appealing to the future of owners of clinics and potentially consolidation as well. So,
thank you very much, Basem.
Welcome.
Very much.
Thank you.
Questions for Basem?
Any questions? Hani?
Thanks a lot for this presentation. I just want to understand what are the challenges that you're facing when you are doing the consolidation for different clinics, and the timeline, just especially if you want to apply the model of shared services.
Okay.
How long usually is it going to take?
Okay, so generally speaking, a lot of the smaller operations are owned and managed by one individual, and that individual is very it's like his baby. He's grown this clinic or this operation, and he's been taking all the decisions and calls, and been comfortable doing that for many years in some cases. So they're not comfortable in corporatizing their business and going to the level where they're able to relinquish some of this decision-making experience and let a larger, broader operation guide him through. I mean, while they end up learning a lot about marketing and HR and all that, but they're not the experts in that field. So that's one of the biggest challenges that we foresee in businesses that are trying to consolidate. The other challenge is the valuation is one of the things that we've seen a lot. And valuation, if it's an independent clinic, a lot of the doctors or the owners of these clinics think that they're worth a lot more than they should be. But I think effectively, as they get together, if this industry starts consolidating the smaller clinics together, the cross referrals and the benefit within that is far more superior than them operating individually at that level.
Other questions?
Thank you for the presentation.
Welcome.
I wanted to ask you how this vision ties and align with the national initiatives and the national agenda. Like we know that Abu Dhabi, the Department of Health have just launched the master planning for healthcare facilities. And so I want to know how this aligns with the vision in general.
Okay, so it certainly works within the same context of that of the vision. I mean, in many ways, we're not. I mean, a consolidated effort at this level, at the smaller polyclinics, gives them the strength and the ability to compete comfortably. It gives them the power to bring in the highest and best resourced quality employees, and therefore deliver a very high quality healthcare service. So at the end of this, an initiative or an opportunity of consolidating clinics, it actually helps in the overall scheme of the healthcare sector. Hope that helps.
Other questions? Okay. I have one more question I think I'd like to ask you, Basem.
Sure.
So you were talking about expectations and
Yes.
the fact that a lot of people might feel their practice or their piece of the world's worth more than maybe it should be. And I think we're seeing this all over. And we've just historically had amazing growth over the last, I don't know, maybe 40, 50 years. Typically, though, if you look at history, you don't see that kind of growth. A lot of times we're more flat, lower growth, maybe staying. So is our expectations in general too high? And do you see innovation coming even while productivity slows down, which it might do, especially if it follows historical trends?
So in the context of valuations and expectations, if you've seen a very like your polyclinic or your facility running at full performance, and you've seen it flourish with wonderful and EBITDA and profitability, then it's hard for you to go back and say, as you go through more challenging times, that you're willing to relinquish some value today as it was what it was to. So the expectations are always on the higher side. Now the good thing about private equity or comparables in the market or multiples of EBITDA is that this is a number that goes across the whole sector. So you know that historically you'll find some of these numbers published. As I mentioned earlier, expectations were on 10 times multiples of EBITDA, and then they went down to 7, and today we're probably looking at 5 times EBITDA. There's always exceptions of those, so it's not like that those are the numbers written in stone, but effectively the market is being valued today at 5 times EBITDA. So at more challenging or lower valuations, innovation gets hindered. There's not much room for innovation, in a sense that the focus shifts back to, I want to improve my profitability, and with improving profitability you're kind of overseeing and not focusing on the innovative aspect of it. So,
and it could be that race to the bottom that we are trying to avoid so much. So,
absolutely.
Well,
Yes.
Basem, thank you so much. Everyone, Basem Abu Dagga, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.